You're listening to The Jacob Valk Show. He's breaking down the latest and greatest in sports as only he can. Follow him on Twitter at RealJacobValk. Here he is, Jacob Valk.
Hello, sports fans! Welcome to another edition of the Jacob Valk Show. I am Jacob Valk, and there's not a lot to get to today. I mean, there's really just the Trifecta and the Pat Jordan interview, but I gave you a short show yesterday. I don't want to give you another show that's kind of short with just me doing the Trifecta. So, what I want to do is, I want to do the Trifecta, but I want to do it twice. So, I'll recap the Panthers and Bears draft class. I'll do this day in sports history for yesterday and today. And I'll give you 2 Mount Rushmores. I think that's the best way to do it. That's the fairest way to do it. I didn't like giving you a short show yesterday. I just really didn't feel well. And I still have a little bit of a scratchy throat, but my stomach is feeling better. It's just one of those bugs that you get. It happens to the best of us. The Pat Jordan interview will come at the end of the 2 Trifectas. It does contain bleeped out swear words, so if that's something that offends you, don't listen to it, but I think it's still worth listening to. He was an interesting guy to talk to. Very, very honest. Alright, here we go. It's time to recap the Panthers and Bears 2020 draft classes. The Panthers went all defense, as we all know. And I'm going to ding them for that a little bit. But I want to talk about the guys they picked. The first 3 guys that they picked, I loved. Derek Brown is going to be a wrecking ball in this league for a long time. I mean, he is as close to the perfect defensive tackle prospect as you're going to get. I've even heard some people say that they liked him more than Quinnen Williams when he was coming out of Alabama. I don't know if those guys were Auburn fans, but I personally liked Quinnen Williams more. I'm not just saying that as a Jets homer. But Derek Brown is close. He's really, really close. Filled a huge need for the Panthers. Great pick. Yetur Gross-Matos was a guy who I had ranked as the 28th best prospect in this draft. Nick had him going 20 in our mock draft. The fact that he slipped to 38 was stunning to me. This guy is a jack of all trades, master of none. See, there are some people that take that as an insult. Oh, you do everything well, but you don't do anything great. I like my NFL players to be well-rounded. You don't need to excel at just one thing. You can be a jack of all trades. It means I can play you in any situation. You want to tell me that means that his ceiling is a little lower? I'm going to go the other way with that. I think it means his floor is higher. If you can do everything well, that doesn't mean that your ceiling is lower. That's the argument that some people make. It's wrong. It means that you're going to see him all 3 downs. You're going to see him in a bunch of situations. You're going to see him used in different ways. I like Gross Matos a lot. I think that was a great pick by the Panthers. Jeremy Chin was a guy who really skyrocketed up a lot of people's boards throughout the draft process. I had him at 63 on my board. ESPN had him at 50, and he went 64. So if we're playing under Price is Right rules, I won. He did miss some games at Southern Illinois, which I really don't like. I don't like his football IQ. I don't think his cover skills are that good, but he has a great frame, was a team captain, great ball skills, really good tackler. There's a lot to like with Chin. I just thought he was being overrated throughout the process. But the fact that he went 64, home run pick by the Panthers. Troy Pride Jr. was a great pick at 113. ESPN had him at 103 on their board. I was in that early 4th round range too. Great frame, durable player, really fast. He was on the track team at Notre Dame. Great cover skills, great football IQ. He doesn't have good ball skills, though. Only 1 interception last year, and he's not a great tackler, but I've said this a million times. I don't mind if my corners are bad tacklers. I like the pick of Troy Pride a lot. The Panthers did need to add another corner after losing James Bradbury in free agency. Great pick. Kenny Robinson was really interesting. This is a guy who was expelled from WVU because of academic fraud. But he still had a love for the game. He had to provide for his mother. So he went to the XFL. And played well for the Battlehawks. I mean, he really shined in those games. I didn't watch a lot of those games, but I watched his tape. And he exploded off the screen. He has really good ball skills, great athleticism. He's an aggressive player. He has a high character. Alright, he made a mistake. I'm sure he owned it in his interview with Matt Rule. He's very lucky that the XFL came back when it did. If it didn't, Robinson goes undrafted. But because he was able to put some good games on tape, he got picked in the 5th round. I don't like him in man-to-man situations. He's not the fastest guy in the world. He does need some seasoning, but he is the kind of guy who can get coached up. The 5th round was a fine range for him. I had him more as a 6th round prospect, but I'm not going to begrudge the Panthers too much for taking him in the 5th round. I am going to begrudge the Panthers for taking some guy who it took me a while to figure out who he was. Bravion Roy. It's spelled Bravion, but it's pronounced Bravion. Bravion Roy. It took me a while to figure out who this guy was. I had him buried in my notes. Probably the worst frame in this draft for a defensive tackle. I wish I could be nicer, but I really can't. He's extremely athletic. He has great speed. But when you look at his arms and when you look at his hands, I mean, they're minuscule. They're just not at the NFL level. This guy's going to have a tough time transitioning to the pros. He's going to have to rely on speed, and now that he's in the NFL, he's not going to be quicker than everyone else. He was quicker than a lot of people at Baylor. He's not going to be quicker than a lot of people in the NFL. He's going to have a tough time sticking around this league. Stanley Thomas Oliver was a fine pick in the 7th round. He was a captain at FIU. He has a good football IQ, great ball skills. He was a former wide receiver. That helps him out a lot there. His acceleration is great, and he's a tough player. But the biggest knock on him is he's really raw. He made the switch from receiver to corner after his sophomore year. He's only played corner for 2 years, and he was doing it at FIU. Not Alabama, not LSU, not Clemson, not Oklahoma. FIU. He's really raw. The talent is there. You can coach him up, but it's going to take him a while to really get going, especially with the coronavirus limiting what players can do to get ready for the upcoming season. All in all, I liked most of the picks the Panthers made. I am going to ding them a little bit for taking all defensive players. The fact that an offensive-minded coach in Matt Rule did that stunned me to no end. But it's still a good grade. I'm giving them a B+. I would have given them an A- if they had taken a good offensive player. There's nothing to be ashamed about with a B+. It's the same grade I gave the Jets. The Panthers had a really good draft. They had an unusual draft. That's the thing. Very weird, but they drafted some good players. Moving on now to the Chicago Bears. And their draft caught some people by surprise, with their first pick being Cole Kmet. I knew they were going to draft a tight end. I said that when they cut Trey Burton, that they were going to take a tight end. Do they have a lot of tight ends on their roster now? Yes. No question. Jimmy Graham, Kmet, Adam Shaheen, Demetrius Harris, Ben Braunecker, etc., etc., etc. But Kmet has a higher ceiling than every one of those guys except Jimmy Graham. That was a fine pick. Cole Kmet was the best tight end in this draft. Fantastic ball skills. Jack of all trades in every other category. He's going to be a contributor in this league for a really, really long time. I just don't understand why people were hating on that pick. Yeah, the Bears have a lot of tight ends, but Kmet's better than a lot of them. Did they have other needs to fill? No question. But tight end was a need also. Don't make it seem like tight end wasn't a need. There was really no one on that roster besides Jimmy Graham that you could count on at the tight end position. And then with their next pick, 7 picks later at 50, the Bears filled their biggest need at cornerback by taking Jalen Johnson. This is a guy who I had as the 56th best prospect in this draft. ESPN was actually higher on him. They had him as the 44th best prospect. Jack of all trades, master of none. They say that his durability is bad. I don't get that. This guy played a lot in his 3 seasons at Utah. He played 37 games. That's pretty durable to me. That was a great pick by the Bears. I thought they had a great second round. Look, if you want to tell me they had a bad draft because they traded their first rounder and they didn't make any picks in the third and fourth round, that's fine, but don't knock the players they picked. Because they picked some good players in the second round. After that, though, it did get kind of dicey. I'll grant you that. Trevis Gipson was really weird to me. This was a guy who I had as an undraftable prospect, really, really raw, gonna need a lot of coaching to become a solid NFL player. He added nearly 60 pounds at Tulsa, which does mean a lot. He has a great work ethic, no question. And he is athletic. But his technique is just terrible. Unless the Bears work with him a lot, Chuck Pagano's going to have his work cut out for him. He's not going to contribute in the next level. Fortunately, though, Pagano is a great defensive mind. And if he has the discipline to work with Gipson, he'll work out. But it's a big, big if. Kindle Vilder, I thought was a great pick out of Georgia Southern. This fit his range to me as a mid-fifth rounder. Great ball skills. He was a team captain at Georgia Southern. Great frame. Durable player. He's really bad in run support. He's not that strong, not a good tackler. But I've said it a million times. I don't care if my corners are bad tacklers. Darrelle Revis was a bad tackler. He's the best cornerback I've ever seen. Vilder has a great football IQ. I think he's going to be a really good player in this league for a while. You want to tell me it was a bad thing that the Bears double-dipped at corner? You can make that argument. I'm with you there. I don't like when teams double-dip at positions. But they added two really good corners. I can't ding them too much for that. I can ding them, but I'm not going to ding them a lot. Darnell Mooney was a really, really surprising pick to me. There were better wide receivers available. The Bears did need a wide receiver to play alongside Allen Robinson and Anthony Miller. Mooney's not going to do that. I had a really low grade on him. I had him as like a 7th rounder. The guy's built like a pencil. Doesn't have a great football IQ. Has butterfingers. No special teams experience. He has great speed, great athleticism, but his technique just isn't there. The Bears gambled on a couple developmental prospects. And in the 5th round, that's not the best use of those picks, especially when one of them, wide receiver position, was such a glaring need. There were so many better wide receivers available at that point in the draft. I mean, just to name a few, Donovan Peoples-Jones, James Prochet, KJ Hill. They all would have made so much more sense than Mooney in that spot. The Bears did take a couple good offensive linemen in the 7th round, and they did need to add some offensive linemen. Arlington Hambright and Latavius Simmons are worth the picks as 7th rounders. I really can't get upset at it. They're solid players for the 7th round. You can take the chance on them, and if they don't work out, they don't work out. All in all, I'm not crazy about what they did in the 5th round. I do have to punish them for only having 2 picks in the first 4 rounds. It just means you're not going to get as good of players as other teams. I'm going to give him a C, a solid C. I can't go much higher than that. The talent just isn't there. They're not going to get a lot of impact from this draft. Alright, it is time for this day in sports history. Or should I say yesterday in sports history? Because yesterday, in most likely 1884, records are spotty on this, Chief Bender was born. Some people say he was born in 83, some people say 84, some people say 85, most people say 84. It doesn't matter when he was born, though, because he was a fantastic pitcher for his era. He may be the only Native American in the Baseball Hall of Fame. I'm not sure if he's the only one. He's one of the few. I'm not sure if he's the only one, though. He was a member of the Ojibwe tribe. Truthfully, I didn't know which tribe he was in until I looked it up. I knew he was Native American. I'm not very good with Native American history and stuff like that. The Ojibwe tribe still exists, so I really can't give you too much else on that. I'm not even sure how he got into baseball. Records from that era are very, very spotty, especially since he grew up on a reservation. He started his major league career in 1903 and immediately dominated. Threw 270 innings, went 17-14 with a 3.07 ERA. He started 33 games, 29 of them were complete games. In 1905, Bender went 18-11 with a 2.83 ERA, and in the 23 games that he started, he completed 18 of them. The Athletics did make the World Series that year, but they lost to the Giants. Bender pitched really well in that World Series. He went 1-1 with a 1.06 ERA, and both of the games that he pitched were complete games. It's really a shame that he was the losing pitcher for Game 5, which was the series-clinching game for the Giants, but Christy Mathewson was sensational in that series. By 1910, though, the Athletics really had something cooking. With Eddie Collins, Jack Barry, Home Run Baker, Bender, Eddie Plank, Jack Coombs, Cy Morgan, and Rube Oldring, just to name a few. Connie Mack is the manager. The Athletics won the World Series in 5 games over the Cubs. That started a string of dominance for the Athletics in the early portion of that decade. In 1911, they repeated as World Series champions by beating the New York Giants in a rematch of the 2005 World Series. Bender was finally able to outduel Christy Mathewson. While Mathewson won Game 1, Bender won Game 4. Bender had the better series by far, not even close. And then in 1913, the Athletics won their 3rd World Series in 4 years. Bender wasn't as effective in that series, but still, he won a World Series, can't take that away from him. And in 1914, they lost to the Miracle Braves. But Bender, all throughout that time, in the regular season, was dominant. In that stretch, he led the league in winning percentage 3 times. In 1915, the Baltimore Terrapins of the Federal League offered Bender a lot of money to play for him. Connie Mack couldn't match it, and Bender went to the Federal League. He instantly regretted it. He went 4-16 with a 3.99 ERA. While that may not sound bad, the 3.99 ERA, that was the worst ERA of his career. And that really spelled the end of his baseball career. He spent a couple years with the Phillies, but, he was playing on lousy teams, was still pitching well, but, when you're pitching for teams that aren't making the playoffs, that's going to wear on you. They weren't lousy teams. I shouldn't say that. They finished with winning records. Those aren't lousy teams, but when you win 3 World Series in 4 years and make 4 World Series in 5 years, you're going to get used to winning. We talk about Jackie Robinson being incredible for being able to withstand the racist taunts that were leveled towards him. Well, Bender had his fair share of racist taunts. People told him to go back to the reservation and said other anti-Native American slurs. Although it's funny, Bender did retort a little bit. He'd smile at him, and after a particularly good inning, he'd scream back at him, "Foreigners! Foreigners!" That's pretty funny. I like that. Chief Bender is one of the most underappreciated players in baseball history. May he rest in peace. On to what happened today. And it's a moment that everyone involved would probably like to forget, but it's a pretty notable moment. On this day, in 1988, Jim Schoenfeld told Don Koharski to have another donut. This was after Game 3 of the 1988 Wales Conference Finals. The Devils were going up against the Bruins. Schoenfeld's Devils had lost to the Bruins 6-1. And you're not going to be happy after you lose 6-1 in a playoff game. The Bruins were now down 2-1 in the series. Schoenfeld was ticked off that there were so many penalties in that game. There were a total of 142 penalty minutes in that game. 72 for the Devils. Now, 70 for the Bruins, but still, this is the playoffs. You've got to give these guys a little bit of leeway. Look, the game was physical, and some of the penalties were deserved, no question, but not all of them. And Schoenfeld got ticked off at Don Koharski. Koharski was a very, very good referee. He lasted a long time in the NHL. Refereed over 1,900 games. But some of those calls, he probably could have laid off the whistle. Schoenfeld got into it with Koharski. Koharski got into it with Schoenfeld. During the altercation, Koharski fell down. He accused Schoenfeld of pushing him. I've seen the clip. I don't think he pushed him. I think Koharski just tripped over something. I mean, if you want to tell me he pushed him, you'd really have a tough time convincing me of that. Koharski accused Schoenfeld of pushing him right after the fact. Schoenfeld said, "I didn't touch you, you're crazy." Koharski said he hoped everything was on videotape. Schoenfeld screamed back, "Good, 'cause you fell, you fat pig! Go have another donut! Go have another donut!" Schoenfeld was suspended for Game 4 by Brian O'Neill, a former executive vice president of the NHL. But the Devils sought a court order to overturn the suspension. About 40 minutes before the start of Game 4, a New Jersey judge by the name of James Madden allowed Schoenfeld to coach. The referees who were assigned to work that game, Dave Newell, Gord Brossiker, and Ray Scapinella, walked out to protest the fact that Schoenfeld would be allowed to coach that game. I can't say I blame them for walking out. You have to support your brother in that sense. But here's the funny part. The fans at the Brendan Byrne Arena waited an hour after the game was scheduled to start for it to actually start. The referees wouldn't budge, though. So there were 3 local off-ice officials found. Paul McGinnis, Jim Sullivan, and Vin Godleski. They actually wore practice jerseys. They couldn't get regulation NHL referee apparel. They had to wear practice jerseys. They could barely skate. They were atrocious. They made terrible calls all throughout that game. Yet somehow the Devils won 3-1. So, hey, give them credit. Schoenfeld's stunt worked. Schoenfeld got the referees out of the game. The Devils won. Schoenfeld was suspended for Game 5. No injunction, no restraining order, no nothing. He was fined $1,000. The Devils were fined $10,000. In Game 5, the Bruins destroyed the Devils 7-1. That was Lou Lamoriello's coaching debut. A lot of penalties in that game. A lot of penalties in Game 4. Very, very physical series. The Devils would lose in 7 games. And the Bruins would later get swept by the Oilers in the Stanley Cup. But that moment is without question one of the funniest in NHL history, now that we can look back on it over 30 years later. If you haven't seen the clip of Koharski and Schoenfeld going at it in the dressing room, it's worth watching. Alright, it's time for some more Mount Rushmores. I'm going to start with the Pittsburgh Pirates. And it's funny, I asked my friend about his Mets Mount Rushmore, and he gave me his Mets Mount Rushmore, different than the one I gave you. But right after that, he asked for my Pirates Mount Rushmore. And it was weird that he went to the Pirates. But after thinking about it, you can understand why. The Pirates have been around since 1882. Now, while they haven't been that successful, they've only made the playoffs 17 times, they've only won 9 pennants and 5 World Series. They've had some great players. Not great pitchers, mind you, but great hitters. Roberto Clemente, Willie Stargell, Honus Wagner, Ralph Kiner, Paul Wainer, Max Carey, Pie Traynor, Bill Mazeroski, Barry Bonds, Andy Van Slyke. Great players. But I did come up with a Mount Rushmore. I'd say it's hard to argue with this. The correct Mount Rushmore is Roberto Clemente, Honus Wagner, Willie Stargell, and Paul Wainer. If you need me to tell you anything about Clemente, shame on you. One of the best hitters of his era. Got his 3,000th hit against the Mets in 1972. It was a double at Shea Stadium off of John Matlack. I have seen the clip. Obviously, he died on a humanitarian mission to Nicaragua. Terrible, terrible end to an excellent career. Honus Wagner, if you need me to tell you about him, shame on you. One of the best shortstops of all time. One of the best players of his era. If you have one of those famous Honus Wagner cards, I'm accepting donations. It's interesting. Some people ask, who's better, Wagner or Jeter? It's close. I may be biased in saying Jeter, but Wagner's up there. No question. If you want to know more about Willie Stargell, listen to either the March 6th or April 9th episode of this podcast. I don't remember when I did a This Day in Sports History on him, but he was a master motivator, won an MVP in '79 for the We Are Family Pirates. Great, great player. And Paul Waner, it's okay if you don't know a lot about him. One of the best players of his era from the mid-20s to the late 30s. Won an MVP, 4-time All-Star, has 3 batting titles, and is a former Yankee. Played 10 games for him. But for the Pirates, Waner has 2,868 hits. That is third all-time for the Pirates, behind Clemente and Wagner. Waner, in his career, finished with 3,152 hits. Alright, moving on now to the San Diego Padres. And this one was kind of tough. Even though the Padres haven't been around for that long in the grand scheme of things, it was still kind of tough to come up with their Mount Rushmore. But I did come up with 4 guys that I'm pretty confident is the correct answer. The correct Mount Rushmore is Tony Gwynn, Trevor Hoffman, Jake Peavy, and Dave Winfield. Tony Gwynn, we all know how great he was. 3,141 hits in his career, all for the Padres. Died way too young. Incredibly dominant hitter. I mean, he hit .394 in 1994. It's fair to wonder if that season didn't get canceled, would he have gotten to 400? It's very possible that he could have. Trevor Hoffman is the second best closer of all time behind Mariano Rivera. 552 saves for the Padres. 601 total. 7-time All-Star, well-deserved Hall of Famer. Jake Peavy, there was a time, was one of the best pitchers in baseball. Won a Cy Young, 3-time All-Star, actually won a Triple Crown for pitchers in '07. That was when he won his Cy Young. Incredibly dominant. I remember there were some Yankee fans that wanted him in '09 instead of Sabathia. They wanted Peavy. Now, granted, Peavy later in his career got hurt and he fizzled out of the league, but there was a time when he was incredibly dominant for the Padres. But the Yankees made the right decision in signing Sabathia. Dave Winfield, you can make the argument, should be higher on this list, but he just didn't spend enough time with the Padres. He only spent 8 seasons there. And while he was incredibly dominant for him, if he wasn't, the Yankees wouldn't have signed him to that big contract in the 1980-81 offseason. I have to punish him a little bit for that he was there for such a short amount of time. But Winfield was incredibly dominant for the Padres, made 4 All-Star teams for him, 3rd in hits, 4th in home runs, incredibly dominant. Alright, here's my interview with Pat Jordan, Like I said, censored swear words, so listener discretion is advised.
You're listening to the Jacob Valk Show. I am Jacob Valk, and I am fortunate enough to be joined by Pat Jordan, the author of Tom Seaver and Me. Pat, how are you?
I'm fine. Getting younger every day, Jake.
Pretty soon you'll be my age.
I doubt it.
So, how did you first meet Seaver?
I was at Sports Illustrated. I started writing for them in 1970, and Tom was already famous. I was 29 in 70, and as an ex-pitcher, I was always watching pitchers. I was fascinated by him as a pitcher, and I would read all these stories about how dull he is. That he doesn't give anybody anything and all that. So I kept asking my editor, Ray Cave. I said, I'd like to do a story on Tom. I want to do a story on Tom. He said, he's been done. So I said, it hasn't been done by me, So it went on and on. Finally, he said, all right. He said, he's dull. Nobody, he never gives anybody anything. What makes you think you can get anything out of him? I said, I don't know, but I think he's a fascinating guy. I want to do him. So I called him up. Right away, he said, no, I don't want to do it. He said, who is this? I said, Pat Jordan of Sports Illustrated. And so I started talking about my minor league experience. I said, well, I was the pitcher in the minor leagues. He says, I know who you are. I said, well, I've been writing stories on pitchers for Sports Illustrated. He said, I know, I read them. So I'm waiting for him to compliment me, right?
Yeah.
Nothing. Silence. So I learned later that was Seaver's compliment. If he didn't say anything, generally he'd say, yeah, bullshit that you're right. But if he didn't say anything, that meant he liked him. So I told him I wanted to do a story. He said, why? I'm dull. I said, you're not dull to me. He said, okay, when do you want to do it? I said, whenever. Now, he was living in Greenwich, Connecticut. I was living in Fairfield, about 40 miles away. So he said, well, do you play basketball? I said, oh, yeah, I had a scholarship to a couple of colleges out of high school. He said, he said, maybe you're too good for me, but I'm going to go up to Greenwich Y. Do you want to play a little one-on-one? And then he starts laughing. He said, just for fun, So it was a scary laugh. He said, I hope I'm good enough for you. I don't want to embarrass myself, that kind of thing. And I got off the phone. I said, this guy's dangerous, So we go up there. We play basketball for about 4 hours. Beat the out of each other. I'm talking about, I forgot he was Tom Seaver. He was just this guy trying to muscle into the basket because that's the only move he had. And we had black eyes, bloody lips and everything. It was murder. And finally the last game wins the next basket wins the series. We'd split like 3 games each. So this is the 7th game. So anyway, he's driving towards the basket, and our rule was in these games, no blood, no foul. Even when there was blood, there was no foul. So he's going to the basket, and the Greenwich Y had a brick wall at one end, right underneath the basket. And I was going to push him right past the basket so he couldn't lay the ball in. And then I thought to myself at the last minute, Tom Seaver, you're going to break his arm over a basketball game? Oh, my God. But he went and he made the basket. So now we go outside and get in my car. And I said, I want you to know I let you win that game. And so he says, Jordan, I don't know anything about you. I know one thing. You never let anybody win at anything in your life. But then again, that was him too. So that was the beginning of our friendship. We were both the same type of guy.
I'm glad you didn't break Tom Seaver's arm. You would not have been a very popular person. Would you agree with that?
I don't. Very few people know about that because it was between me and him, and he was beating the shit out of me. I mean, when he would go up for a rebound, he'd make sure his shoulder clipped my jaw and knocked me into the wall. I forgot it was Tom Seaver while we were playing. But I remembered at that split second, this was Tom Seaver. You can't push him into the wall,
Right. So you said that you first met him in 70. Obviously, he's coming off the heels of a magical 1969 season where he wins Cy Young,
Right.
second in National League MVP voting to Willie McCovey. What did he tell you about that season?
But I didn't ask him. We never talked about seasons. We talked about personalities, our two personalities, what made us tick, and our pitching.
Okay.
Pitching, I never asked him about Cy Youngs or anything like that. You know,
Okay.
I wasn't interested in what was in every newspaper.
So what
I
advice
was always
did he...
interested in Tom Seaver. You know, what was he like? And we would have instances where we would conflict. Like, for example, he used to, he told me I used to think too much. And I used to tell him he doesn't think enough. And at one point, I was explaining to him as he was getting older, I said, you got to keep pitching. I said, don't worry about saving pitches in your arm now that you're older. I said, Hemingway said, your writing talent is like a knife. He says, you got to keep using it to keep it sharp, even though it wears down. He says, rather than don't use it and let it get rusty. So Tom looks at me, he says, you just keep thinking, Butch, that's what you're good at. And I said to him, Sundance, I got vision and the rest of the world wears bifocals. And that was the basis, the contradiction in our personalities,
Right, right.
He thought I was obsessively introspective, and I thought he wasn't introspective enough except when it came to pitching.
So you said that you talked about personalities a lot. I'd love to know what his relationship was like with Yogi Berra, specifically his relationship with Berra after he decided to start him in Game 6 of the 1973 World Series.
Never, I don't even know about that.
Really?
I had no interest in any of his teammates, his relationships, or everything. It was really, this book is two guys talking.
Two guys talking. I like that. Okay, so it's like...
it's two guys talking. It's yin and yang or whatever. That's all it is. I never asked him about anything. I would ask him after a game. For example, I'd call him up after a game. I'd be watching on television, but I didn't call him like midnight or anything after he got through. The next morning, I said, Tom, you're hanging your curveball. He says, no, tell me something I don't know. I said, well, you're not dropping your left shoulder and raising your right shoulder high enough to get on top of the curveball. What do you know about a curveball? I said, I know how to throw a curveball is what I know, and you don't, obviously. I mean, that would be the kind of conversation we'd have over a game or a particular moment on the field for him.
Okay.
I would never. I don't even remember. I wasn't a Mets fan or anything. I was a Tom Seaver fan, and eventually he was a friend. And it's like two guys in a profession, and they don't really talk about, how did you pick that stock? Gee, that was so brilliant about picking that. I mean, we just talked about whatever was going on between us. He would ask me how my life was, and I'd tell him about a dog died, and he talked about his dog who died, that kind of thing. It's not a Mets book.
No, of course not.
And it's not a Tom Seaver's greatest hits book. It's a look at who Tom Seaver really was when the curtain was down.
Okay.
I mean, the Tom Seaver no sports writers ever wrote about, no fans were clued in about, only a handful of people that he ever let his hair down in front of him, and I was one of them. I mean, he was outrageously obscene to, the language, went back and forth, but he would never do that in public.
No, of course not.
Or not even to people he didn't know,
Right. Did he criticize, let me ask you this, did he criticize anyone when he was talking to you that made you shake your head like, wow, I can't believe you feel that way?
No. He didn't criticize him. As he got older, he would complain about these young managers trying to micromanage him, like Tony La Russa. Tony La Russa was in love with intentional walks, and Tom hated that. He said, "It's giving somebody something free." So, La Russa would come out to the mound when he was with the White Sox and tell him to put this guy on base. And Tom would say, yeah, sure. And then he pitched to the guy and get him out. You know? He said, I had to teach Tony a couple of things, he would say. And I did talk to Tony when I was writing the book, and he said I learned a lot from Tom Seaver. So, Tom wouldn't let anybody dictate to him what he's supposed to do on the mound. I think it was Rube Walker came out once when Bill Hodges was the manager, and I think Walker was the pitcher coach, and Tom was, and he was in a tight situation, and he got down on his haunches like like an Indian does when they're over a fire, or a football player in a huddle, and with his elbows on his knees. And they thought, so Rube goes out, calls time. He said, Tom, are you all right? Are you hurt? Tom looks up, he says, what the are you doing here? He said, I'm thinking, that's all. Get off my mouth. And Rube trots off. And that was Tom. I mean, those instances I have.
Okay.
But I don't have any. I'm trying to even think. He talked a little bit about Bud Harrelson, but nothing really about the Mets. His disappointment in the Mets that they never hired him after he got through playing showed through a lot.
Did he want to be a pitching coach?
He wanted to be a pitching coach at first, but after a while, he lost. Nobody came calling. Don't forget, he was the last of he and Clemens were the last two drop and drive pitchers, really.
Right.
Who got most of the. I used to call them grunters. They grunt the ball to the plate. They drop and drive, get low to the ground, drive with their legs, and they basically muscle the ball up. As opposed to a guy like Guidry, who had a beautiful effortless motion, it looked like he never put an ounce of energy into his fastball. And so I think they didn't think of him as a pitching coach because his style of pitching was passé, and almost everybody was tall and fall, where they stand straight up, and go straight down with the overhand curveball and overhand slider and stuff like that. Which was also a catcher, Carlton Fisk, who he played with the last couple of years in Chicago. He had the same problem. He had a certain way of catching and moving the glove. And that's how he caught, and that was his thing, but he never became a coach because they didn't think that was the proper way to teach a young guy coming up. He wanted to manage or be a general manager. And I don't know. I got a lot of quotes from people saying he was too big for the Mets. They didn't want him around. They wanted him to come over on a Mets day or something and sign autographs and then scram. But they felt he was a little bit dangerous. You never knew what he was going to say as he got older because, like all us old guys, we get angry and we don't give a shit anymore.
I can tell.
So you say what's on your mind, and so I think the Mets were a little afraid of him. So he never really got the offer. For the same reason, the greatest left-handed pitcher in the history of baseball, and all my young friends say, oh, you mean Steve Carlton? I said, no, Warren Spahn.
Yeah, of course.
365 games.
Right.
Completed the greatest.
Killed the Yankees in 57.
Right. So Warren Spahn, and nobody ever asked him to be a pitching coach. But did you see the way Warren Spahn threw a baseball with the high leg kick and all that?
Of course.
Who are you going to teach that to?
No,
I'll tell you another story. Ted Williams came to spring training when I was in spring training with the Braves. This is minor leagues.
Yeah.
And he's going to teach all the hitters around home plate how to swing, So naturally, I'm a pitcher. I want to learn. So I was there hanging out too with the hitters. And he says, now, when you're up at plate, when you see the ball's got that downward spin, it's a breaking ball down. So you hold off a split second before you let go. He said, when you see it that has an upward spin, you got to adjust to the fact that it's going to rise as the fastball. And when you see a slider and it has a little white dot in it, You know that's a slider. All the ball players nodded. And so he leaves, and the hitters are talking to him. Who the sees the spin on a curveball and a fastball? Who sees the dot on the slider? Well, Ted Williams, who had the greatest size in baseball, which is why he became a fighter pilot, and I think it was the Second World War in Korea. But who's he going to teach how to hit?
No, he can't. I mean, he tried. He tried with the Senators. It didn't work. Let me ask you this, and we're talking to Pat Jordan, the author of Tom Seaver and Me. Let me ask you this. Why do you think it is that these great players like Seaver or Spahn never get into coaching, but these average players like Aaron Boone, Joe Girardi, or guys like that get into coaching? Why is that?
Okay. The old expression was, them that can't teach. Hemingway never taught a course in writing. Okay? Why? He was a writer. That's number one. Them that can't teach. And so guys who sat on a bench for years watching and seeing all the things they didn't know how to do, when it came time to be a coach like Charlie Lau, a hitting coach, Charlie Lau never hit his weight. Or, guys.
No, you're right.
All these guys who became terrific managers. Ralph Hopp was a bullpen catcher.
Don Zimmer was a terrible player.
Right, Bravo. So they learned to study and see why they were terrible. And they watching the game unfold, they could say, "No wonder I can't do that. How could that guy do that?" And then they would try to, if they were smart. Well, all these guys were smart, by the way. They might not have had the physical talent, but they were smart guys. And they would look and they would understand why they couldn't do it. And this is part of what the book is about with me and Seaver, because he did things that I didn't know how to do when I was a kid, because I had this fastball and I was like a super talent, and I never had to think about it. And Tom had thought about it from his earliest ages, and he created his talent. I didn't create a talent. It was just given to me one day, and I never understood it. Yeah. I mean, he told me once he pitched a no-hitter in Little League. He was so proud of it, he showed me the ball. I said, Seaver, I pitched 4 in a row, and 2 of them were perfect games with 18 strikeouts. He said, Joe, you never did that. So I sent him the clipping, which is in the book, by the way. So
I have a friend that keeps going on and on about the no-hitter that he threw in Little League. It's like, okay, I get it. It was Little League.
Everybody pitches a no-hitter in Little League.
Of course.
I pitched 6 games my last year, and I gave up 2 hits. I pitched 2 one-hitters and 4 no-hitters. I struck out 18 guys in a game, which was a 6-inning game, 3 times.
I struck everyone out.
Yeah. And then in 3 games, I struck out 17 guys. So basically, only 3 outs were not strikeouts, and I only gave up 2 hits. So
That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, I mean, I was. They called me in the Daily News and they wrote a column about me. Yeah, Yankee Stadium. I was in Yankee Stadium at 12 years old with Mel Allen, interviewing me and my parents before a game.
Really? What was it like talking to Mel Allen?
He didn't talk to me. He talked to my mother and father, and he asked me a question. And I had come with my bag and a glove. I thought the Yankees were going to ask me to throw on the sidelines and then tie me to a contract.
They should have.
I said, sure. No. So I had the glove in the bag, and I was so disheartened that the Yankees were going to sign me that I mumbled something to Mel Allen, and and that was the end of it. But anyway, this is the thing. Part of it is me learning through Tom all the reasons why I never became Tom Seaver. We would talk about. He would tell me how he used to do things. I said, if I'd only known that when I was a kid. I didn't know. I just had the talent and never really understood it. Tom didn't really have talent until he grew up.
Let me ask you a philosophical question, if that's okay.
Yeah, I love philosophical questions.
Okay. Do you think if you're good at something, you're meant to do it?
No.
Okay.
There's other things involved. I was very good at something, but I wasn't meant to do it. And I'm thank God, because I would have been one of those. I'm not the greatest person, but I would have been a really lousy guy if I had been a baseball star. You know, I know I was an obnoxious kid, and I'm an obnoxious adult, but in a different way. No, the best thing ever happened is I failed in baseball.
Okay.
The best thing ever happened to me, because I became a writer, and then I found out what was wrong with me. I haven't been able to correct it, but
right. Let me ask you this: why do you think you and Seaver developed such a close friendship?
We had one thing in common. We were unbelievably competitive, egocentric, and unbending. Okay? And we clashed all the time, verbally. You know?
Opposites attract.
Yeah, it was true. But I have a great expression for that. Opposites attract, but they should never live together. Tom and I were great on moments. You know, he would call me sometimes, like there was a scene about him in Cincinnati. It was lonely. When he was out in Cincinnati, his wife was in Greenwich with the kids. They were still in school. He was like 0-5, earned run average about 5. He was this was after the aborted season that he should have won the Cy Young Award. And he was a little scared. He called me. I said, yeah. So I finagled a story for somebody. I forgot who it was. And I went out, and all we did was talk about getting old, and as a pitcher, you know, and what you have to do now. You don't have that fastball anymore. And he was a little at a loss. And in the middle of our conversation about pitching and what you do when you get older and all that, he looked at me and he says, why didn't you ever become a pitching coach? I said, nobody ever asked. He said, you know more about pitching than any of the coaches I ever talked to. But that's because I couldn't do it.
Right.
You know, once I couldn't do it anymore, I did nothing but watch pitchers and try to understand what they knew that I didn't know. And Tom, you know, I learned a lot about him. I mean a lot from him, rather. And he was one of the best guys I ever do.
So let's move past Seaver's baseball career, because after he retired, obviously he didn't get into coaching. He got into the wine business. Why did Seaver get into the wine business? And how did he get so good at it? Because his wine's really good.
Oh, I'm not a wine drinker. My wife is, but
okay.
First of all, his father grew vegetables, fruits, plums, I think, and nuts out in the valley there. Where was he from? Not Bakersfield, Stockton. One of those towns where they breadbasket of California. And his father was basically a grower of fruits and vegetables, I guess. And when Tom was playing baseball, he used to spend his time gardening before a game because it relaxed him. I mean, when I went out to Cincinnati, we had to go to a damn greenhouse. So he bought all these plants. And we're on the back deck of his condo in Cincinnati, and he's planting all these begonias or whatever the hell they are into pots, you know. And I said to him, why don't you just leave in the pots they came with? They look all right. He said, you would do that, wouldn't you? I said, I wouldn't even bought them in the first place. So I said, why do you do this? He said, it calms me before a game, you know. And so that's how he liked growing things.
Okay.
You know, like my wife, when I'm talking to you on the porch here, she's transplanting plants right in front of my eyes. I mean, she shows them to me. I said, nice. You know, I could care less. But Tom loved that. And so I think it's a natural progression because he liked wines himself to drink. And I think he thought in his retirement, why not combine the two things? He likes wine as a pleasure, and he loves planting and growing things. And so it was a perfect fit for him.
So obviously your sharpest attack, and I could talk to you for hours. But Seaver now seems to have withdrawn from public life. He was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. What's your relationship with Seaver like now?
None.
None?
Yeah, last time I saw him was in 2013.
Oh.
And he was talking then about Lyme disease, that he had Lyme disease, and he had short-term memory loss. And it was evident he did. Like, we were having breakfast, and I had pancakes, he had a muffin or something, and the waitress cleared the table, and he said, "Pat, you didn't have any breakfast." So I said, "Tom, I had the..." He says, "Yeah, you had the what? The pancake." He had short-term memory loss. But I said, "Tom," I said, "you're 70, I'm 73. I said, "I can't remember what I had for breakfast yesterday anyway, so we're old guys." I said, "But I can remember what I did when I was 6 years old." And he said, and eventually he told me, he said, "You know, I can remember every pitch to this day."
Wow.
And he described a moment with Willie McCovey that was fabulous. Tom Seaver's rule of pitching. There are a number of rules. One of them is, you're in a real clutch situation, you never get beat with anything but your best pitch, which for Tom is a 98-mile-an-hour fastball, right?
Right.
So now you've got Willie McCovey out, bases loaded, 2 outs. 3-2. Everybody in the ballpark knows what he's throwing, including McCovey. So he keeps pausing around, throwing the ball to first base to hold a runner who's not going anywhere because the bases are loaded, right? Where's he going? So finally he goes into his motion. McCovey's ready, and he throws a changeup. McCovey swings through it with one hand, strike 3. So I said, "Why did you throw a changeup like that? You broke Tom Seaver's rule of pitching." He said, "Even Tom Seaver has to believe in mystery."
Go ahead.
Yeah, and then 25 years or 20 years later, Willie and McCovey were at a Hall of Fame thing, and first thing Willie McCovey asked is, "Tom, why the did you ever throw me a changeup in that position, in that situation?" And Tom told him,
because it worked.
But it works. It was mystery. I said, I tell writers all the time when I teach a course or something, and they say, "Well, how do you do it?" I said, "Well, you guys, I outline everything. I'm very dogmatic. I make sure I got everything down, and then when something comes up I didn't figure out, I just go wherever it takes me." So anyway, I said, you got to believe in mystery. Anyway.
Yeah, I like that. Talking to Pat Jordan, the author of Tom Seaver and Me. So I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about your minor league career, because I'm always fascinated to talk to former players, whether it's minor leagues, major leagues. I'm always fascinated to talk about those guys. There are a few players that I want to ask you about, if that's okay.
Sure.
Okay. What was it like playing with Ron Hunt?
I roomed with Ron Hunt. What a pain in the ass. Okay? Is he still alive, I hope?
Let me check. Yes, he is. He's 79 years old.
So am I. It was a real pain in the ass. He was one of these Midwestern guys, real ironhead, never had an original thought in his life. Like we were both living in rooms with this woman in McCook, Nebraska, an old lady. And she always wanted to be like my grandmother. I was not interested, But Ron he was taking pictures with her and sending things back to his family. So one day, this mother and father come up, and Tom is taking pictures. Ron Hunt is taking pictures with this landlady, little old grandmother. And so, and I said, "Who's that?" He said, "That's my mother and father." I said, "Oh." A couple of weeks later, 2 more people come up, and he's taking pictures with this little grandmother. I said, "Who are they?" He said, "That's my mother and father." 2 different people. Obviously, his parents got divorced and remarried, so he had 2 mothers and fathers, as far as he's concerned.
Okay.
But my point was, he was dogmatic and simplistic in a way even I at 18 was not.
Okay.
And you know, and Ron, he played hard. But I tell you what, I'll go Ron Hunt. I'm going to tell you a Seaver story.
Sure.
In spring training, when I used to pitch to Ron Hunt, I tried to hit him. You know how he always crowded the plate?
Yeah.
Yeah, he didn't have to crowd the plate with me because I wanted to hurt him because he was a pain in the ass. But I was so wild I never hit him. Now, Tom was pitching one game against Hunt because he asked me, did you ever pitch against Ron? I said, yeah, it was a pain in the ass. So he said, I pitched against him once. I said, I threw him a great fastball up and in. I said, popped it up right to me. I caught it. I said, out number 3. I looked down and he sprawled in the dirt. It wasn't a pop-up. It went off his head. So, you know, I said to Seaver, I said, good, you hit the son of a I tried for 3 years and I couldn't hit him.
Well, here's another guy who probably.
Oh, no, I'm going to give you another guy. Pete Rose. Pete Rose, the last batter I ever faced.
You faced
in the minor leagues. Yeah, I pitched against him. He was with Tampa, the Reds.
Wow.
So now I'm on the way out, and so Pete Rose was doing the Charlie Hustle thing. And what people didn't realize is in the minor leagues, players on both teams hated Rose, his own teammates and the other guys, because this running the first base on a walk was showing them up. The only people who appreciated it were Little League fathers who didn't know any better. See how much he loves the game, the way he runs the first base? So we used to say in the dugout, we'd yell out when Rose would run the first base, they'd call it a walk, ass, not a run. That's why they call it a walk. So he was really disliked. So now the last batter up, Pete Rose, I got 2 runners on. And he used to wiggle his bat, you know, while he was at bat. So I said, I'm going to go out on my sword here. I'm trying to throw the ball at him. The best way to throw at a guy, you try to throw at his ankles.
Okay.
Because that'll get him out of the game, too. You know, you don't want to kill him. You don't want to throw a fastball at his head, kill him. But throw it at his ankles and let him limp off and not show up for 4 or 5 days. I was bouncing the ball in the dirt, and finally I get 3-0. I threw a pitch. He hit it off the wall in center field, double, cleared the bases. Manager comes out to take me out, and I look at him. He's jabbering to the second baseman. I walk out through the dugout, through the car, get in the car, drive home to my wife, pack the bags, drove north, and that was the last time I ever pitched in a game.
Wow.
Pete Rose was the last guy I faced. Now you can ask me about anybody else you want.
Okay, good. Can you lay out your time with Phil Niekro?
Phil Niekro was one of the best guys I ever met. He wasn't as smart as Tom, but he was an angel. Phil Niekro, he was one of the purest guys. I love that guy. He was one step from working in a coal mine. He was pitching in McCook, Nebraska in '59, and he was afraid to throw his knuckleball because he didn't want to be laughed at because nobody knew anything about a knuckleball. You know what I mean? So if the ball would bounce in the dirt or the catcher couldn't catch it even if it was over the plate.
Well, you know how you catch a knuckleball, right? You wait until it stops rolling.
You what?
You wait until it stops rolling and then you pick it up. That's how you catch it.
Yeah, that's how they catch it, yeah. But how you throw it is, you throw it and you just push it towards the plate and you pray to God. You know, you give it has a will of its own, a knuckleball. You don't control it like you do a curve. So Phil wouldn't throw it. He was getting the kicked out of him. So finally our manager, Steineke, told him, he said, Phil, what do you think you do after baseball? So Phil said, well, my father worked in the mines. I go back to, I think it was Bridgeport, Ohio. I'd worked in the mine. He says, well, you're about 2 weeks away from going to work in the mine. Unless you throw your knuckleball every pitch, you're going back to Bridgeport, Ohio, and work in the mines. So Phil, every pitch, 3-2, 3-0, whatever. So he threw it, and he went from 0-2 with like a 9-point ERA to 7-2, won 7 straight games. ERA dropped to something like 1.9 or something, and he was the MVP of the league.
Yeah, he was
Phil.
sensational.
And you want to know something? The first story I ever wrote for a national magazine was on Phil Niekro after he won 23 games for the Braves in the late 60s, 68, 69. And I called him up, and I was just starting out writing. We're doing this for True magazine. He's the only guy I knew. He said, "Sure, Pat." He said, "Anything I could do for you." So I go down to Atlanta, rainy day. We're in a bar for about 4 or 5 hours. And the following year, after his big year, he lost almost 20 games. He lost 19 games. So I said, "What happened?" He said, "Oh, all these guys are taking greenies." They said, "Oh, greenies are great. They jack you up. You throw harder." So I said, "What'd you do?" He said, "I took the greenies, and I thought I was throwing harder. So I threw fastballs, but I wasn't throwing harder. I was just throwing harder in my head, and it got killed." So, and then about, I was well into my career, maybe 20 years later. He was coaching at the Colorado Silver Bullets, the girls. Remember the Colorado Silver Bullets, the girls team?
No, I can't say I do.
There was a girls baseball team, and Phil was the manager.
Okay.
And they were playing minor league guys, and they were playing a game in Charlotte against minor league guys, good minor league guys. So I went there with Phil, and it was just like we hadn't seen each other yesterday. And then before the game, we were out. Not even before the game. It was the day before the game, and we were in an outdoor lobby of this place. We drink it because Phil likes to drink, so do I. And all the girls were coming around, and they were kneeling at our feet like we were 2 college professors. And Phil and I were swapping stories about the minor leagues and stuff, you know.
Yeah.
And the girls were all kneeling there like these were 2 history professors shooting the bull, yeah. He was cute. Great guy. I called him up. There. Go to the Hall of Fame, right?
Yeah.
I call him up. I said, "Phil, it's me." He said, "Hey, Pat." I said, "Phil, nobody deserved it as much as you do." He said, "Oh, Pat, we both know it should have been you."
Well, look, people don't realize you were a really talented pitcher. You signed for a lot of money back in the day.
Yeah,
you were a good pitcher.
I got 50,000. I got 50,000 in '59. Tom got 50,000 in 68,
65, 66, something
yeah.
like that.
My 50,000 was worth a lot of money.
Yes, it was worth more than his.
Yeah, but anyway, no. But you know, the guys like Phil, and they're few and far between. I mean, anything that ever happened good to Phil, he deserved it, and same thing with Tom.
All right, Pat, I'll get you out on this. Would you be able to describe your experiences with Rico Cardi?
Brick hands. He was my catcher. I'll tell you, I got to tell you 2 stories about Rico Cardi. First of all, he got the slowest hands in the history of sports. So you throw a fastball, and his hand is with the glove is moving in slow motion while the ball is bouncing off the backstop. People don't remember. They brought him as a catcher because he couldn't do anything else, you know. But he could hit. I mean, no, Rico could always hit. So now,
what a batting title.
I mean, he power everything. He was a hell of a hitter. So now, Rico, we're in Davenport, Iowa, and I figured I used to go drink at this bar downtown. I said, I'm going to take Rico out. I'm going to try to talk to him, see if I can maybe say, well, you got to anticipate the pitch, Rico, because, you know, you can't just at the last minute stab at it, you know, see if he could help me out a little bit. So we go to the bar, we're drinking, and I'm talking. I turn to look at him. He's asleep on the bar, head's on the bar. So now, this is 1961. 60? Maybe, no, it's 1960.
Early 60s.
Yeah. So, no, it's 60. 60. So my second year. So, That's all right. I grab him, I take him home, I get him into his room, and next day I go back to the bar after the game, and the bartender looks at me. He said, "I can't serve you anymore." I says, "Why?" He says, "I won't serve you because you brought that in here."
Ooh.
Now, I'm from Connecticut. I grew up with black kids. I was in Bridgeport, Connecticut. I mean, I was, I played basketball and baseball with black kids all my life, in high school and grammar school, Little League and all. So I never, I mean, I would have realized if I was in Macon, Georgia, that I was in Davenport, Iowa. I mean, to me, that was the North, no?
No, of course. I'm stunned.
Yeah.
I can't even process that.
Yeah, well, I couldn't either. I mean, I would have been so stupid to go into a redneck bar in Macon or Aiken or someplace like that. But I thought I was in the North like everybody else.
Wow.
But I wasn't.
Oh, God.
So that's my Rico Cardi story.
No, I appreciate it, Pat. You've been nothing but honest. I've had a blast talking to you. Thank you very much for your time.
Okay, thanks. Take care.
All right. That was Pat Jordan. His book is Tom Seaver and Me. Thanks for listening. Here comes the outro.
Thanks for the plug, Jacob from the past. It does mean a lot. Tomorrow, you're going to get another interview, but this one is going to be with Doug Feldman, who wrote a book about Bob Thomas, former Bears kicker. He kicked a little for the Lions, Chargers, Giants, and later became a judge in the state of Illinois. We'll mainly talk about football, but there will be some law questions in there, because I think my father will murder me if I don't bring it up. Until tomorrow, I am Jacob Valk saying that people in Southern California would leave early from sex.